LeBron James just said if the Pelicans get this player, they'll become title contenders. Wait, what? Who? I'll tell you in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Wednesday, a game day for the New Orleans Pelicans, hopefully trying to get back to winning ways, taking on the Orlando Magic. We'll talk about that game in tomorrow's episode, but LeBron James just kind of gave the Pelicans the key to becoming title contenders. They go and get this player. I'm cheating a little bit on this. I'll explain in a minute. They can become a title contender. That's kind of a big deal here, and it informs the Pelicans and us of what they're likely going to do this offseason anyway. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about this team as they gear up for the playoffs, hopefully avoiding the play-in tournament. We'll talk more about the standings in today's episode. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join almost 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. It's been a fun season, and it's not done yet. These games matter. There's going to be some postseason action here in New Orleans. So tell a friend about the show as well and become an everydayer. And that means you listen Monday through Friday. And if you do, let me know in the comments down below. Tell me at the arena where I'll have the Locked On Pelicans stickers to give away. So let's get into what LeBron James said. And look, I'm cheating a little bit here. LeBron James has started a podcast with JJ Redick where they get into a lot of like X's and O's and real in-depth kind of hoop discussion that you can really only get from two former players or coaches who've kind of been there on a daily basis. And there's a clip going around from their podcast, and it really talks about how the Miami Heat with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh kind of got unlocked in the early 2010s and became title contenders and won 2 NBA finals, making 4 straight NBA finals during that time. And LeBron talked about Chris Bosh, who had been a power forward, a 4 with the Toronto Raptors, moving to being more of a, not a small ball center, but playing center for the Miami Heat, and how it unlocked so many other things for that team and let them become the best version of themselves. By moving Chris Bosh to the 5 and turning him into more of a three-point shooter, it just unclogged things for the Miami Heat. Look, when you have Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, 2 of the best drivers, guys that can attack the basket like nobody's business, teams would wall off the rip. But when you put Chris Bosh there and remove him from the paint and put him in the corner or on the three-point line, and he became a good three-point shooter during his time with the Miami Heat, that changed things, because if teams left LeBron James, well, then he's going to kick it right out to Chris Bosh, who's going to make a 3 and beat you. And it just opened, he said, the lane for guys to basically do, they're called slot cuts, but basically just cut right into the middle of the paint and get a pass. And that's a really important thing for this Pelicans team, right? Do I really need to tell you how, like, this is something that they need to be doing, that they need more of? No, not at all, right? You know this, that this is what they need to be doing, that they need to have more space and all of those sorts of things. So by Chris Bosh becoming a center, it unclogged the lane for the Miami Heat, which allowed them to be the best versions of themselves. You can see how it applies to New Orleans. So the player that the Pelicans need is not Larry Nance Jr., not Jonas Valanciunas. It's an entirely different player, right? But it goes, you know, the way teams defend Zion, they're walling off the rim. You saw it with Nurkic and Kristaps Porzingis in the last 2 games. They just kind of chilled in the paint and waited for Zion to drive. Nothing would work. They couldn't even get a cut coming down the middle of the lane because it was so clogged. Okay, so you need a three-point shooting center. But it goes beyond just shooting threes, right? Larry Nance Jr. actually has a very good three-point percentage this season. If you sort by player stats on NBA.com and you look at just three-point percentage from qualified players, Larry Nance Jr. is 5th. He's shooting 44.1% from 3. but he only takes 1.1 per game. So it's not the biggest threat out there. Teams will live with him hitting those shots. So you need a guy that shoots threes on decent enough volume and who's a good rebounder too. So who is that player? I think the dream target is Karl-Anthony Towns from the Minnesota Timberwolves, but he might be ungettable. Their ownership situation is weird. That's going to be a very expensive team. They're good without Towns. So maybe there's a chance you could pry him away. He would be very expensive, but if the Pelicans want this sort of player, they're going to have to pay up in terms of draft picks and maybe young talent as well, though I don't know if I would include Herb Jones in a trade like this. So say Towns is ungettable. What about a guy like Jared Allen? He doesn't shoot enough threes. I just don't think that would work here. The vertical spacing is somewhat of a thing, only somewhat, but I don't know if that would necessarily help the New Orleans Pelicans here, especially if you don't have guys that can get him the ball in a vertical sense. There's Jaren Jackson Jr. from Memphis, but there's zero way that they would ever trade him away right now. Kind of same goes for Kristaps Porzingis, right? He would be a perfect fit. We talked a lot about that with the Pelicans this offseason, but I doubt that Boston moves on from him. They gave him an extension this past summer after trading for him. But there's a couple of other names too. There's Nikola Vucevic from the Chicago Bulls. They're a bit of a dumpster fire. They don't really have any direction. He's making $20 million next season. Could you go and get him? Could you find a way to do a sign and trade for Jonas Valanciunas, include someone younger and maybe a pick in there? He shoots the three ball pretty well. He does it on good volume as well. So is that a guy that maybe could make a difference? He's kind of a power forward, kind of a center, kind of a combo, but he's taking over 4 threes per game. He gets you 10.6 rebounds. He can be a very useful player to this team, even if he doesn't shoot the three ball particularly well. You have other names like Isaiah Stewart, who is undersized when it comes to rebounding, but a good three-point shooter and a legitimate threat there. You have Dean Wade from Cleveland that could be an option, but he's a little bit undersized, and the rebounding certainly isn't there when it comes to him. Myles Turner might be the most gettable depending on what the Indiana Pacers want to do and who they view their young core as, but that team has been good and fun when they've been healthy, so I don't necessarily know if he's the type of guy that you could pry away. There's Alperen Şengün from the Houston Rockets. They need to make a decision on his future. I imagine they will re-sign him. He's not that great of a shooter, but he gives you playmaking. So if you get the ball out to him on the wing, he can play make from there. He can play make out of the post. He can be enough of a three-point shooter, and he's a decent rebounder, not a good defender. But the Pelicans' defense has been good no matter who they put in. So I'm not really worried when it comes to defense with any of these players. You know, you also have a smaller target name like Santi Aldama from Memphis. I don't know if he's the best fit necessarily, but if you kind of need a buy low option here, that's maybe a guy that they could go on. But basically what this says is you need a three-point shooting center. And the Pelicans, if they want to turn into true title contenders and really unlock this offense, that's what they've got to go and get this offseason. I expect they're going to do everything they can to go and find that player. The problem is three-point shooting centers that are good rebounders and like adequate enough defenders are just not readily available. The Pelicans have the assets to go get any of them, and you've got to make sure you get one this offseason. LeBron James said it, right? The Miami Heat went from not winning a title to winning 2 because they unlocked their offense even more with what they did with Chris Bosh. It's time for the Pelicans to do the same thing. LeBron James just gave you the blueprint. Blueprint we already kind of knew about too. I said I was cheating a little bit on the headline here in the title, but overall it kind of speaks to a lot of what the Pelicans need to do, and hopefully they'll be able to do it this offseason, because the past couple of games have really taught us and given other teams the blueprint on how to beat the Pelicans when Zion Williamson's out there on the court. There's only so much he can do, even though he's still scoring and still doing a good job against it. And maybe that will be more small ball offense, and I think you'll see more of that with Zion at the 5 against the Orlando Magic. We'll probably talk about that in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Another reason they're struggling right now, though, it goes beyond just the center position. They're missing Brandon Ingram. We don't need to overthink this sometimes. Let's talk about how they're missing Brandon Ingram and how that will get fixed when they get into the postseason and when he returns, and what his injury update is, because we got a little bit of that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Whether that's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this team. Become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to Locked On Pelicans. If you are, let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join almost 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's keep talking about the Pelicans kind of struggling here. And part of it is how teams are defending Zion Williamson. But you know what makes that a little bit easier? When you've got another really good threat out there on the court, and they're missing Brandon Ingram right now, and you can really see it. I've said this repeatedly when he went down injured in that game against Orlando, I think it was. This is not a better team without Brandon Ingram. I got a lot of texts and people asking that question, and immediately it was like, no, they are not. And you're really seeing it right now. The ball isn't moving as well. Sometimes you just need a dude who's not scared to take shots, and Brandon Ingram is not scared to take shots. So while I don't love some of the mid-range that he takes, overall, right now, you need a guy that's at least willing to shoot, because we've seen multiple times now that there are players on the Pelicans who aren't willing to shoot, who were too scared to shoot, and that's certainly not going to get it done. When you have a bunch of guys that are kind of terrified about that and not willing to do that, you're not going to go very far in anything that you do. So having a guy that's kind of fearless, willing to try and take over a game would be really useful. Someone that keeps the ball moving for New Orleans would be really useful. We've seen this offense get a little bit stagnant. Sometimes just making a couple of shots can break you out of that. But we've also talked about how offense turns into defense, defense then turns into offense, right? Teams are running against New Orleans because they're missing a good bit right now. So if Brandon Ingram takes a shot and makes a shot, and he does that, right? That leaves your defense the opportunity to get back and get set, and you're not trying to defend in transition. He's also the leader in assists per game for New Orleans with almost 6 per game, 20.9 points per game, 5.8 assists, along with 5 rebounds. Defensively, too, they could have used him against a guy like Kevin Durant. He's been a good defender this season. Having Herb kind of take on the best perimeter backcourt player, but then also having Brandon Ingram be a willing defender on some of these better wing players, too, and using his size, using his length, and being aggressive there can help New Orleans actually generate better offense, a steal, a block, forcing a missed shot, letting them get out and run. All of those things will help the Pelicans for where they are from these past couple games where offense at times has been really hard to come by. So yes, while the center position is a problem really without a true answer for New Orleans right now, look, this is still a good team here when they're healthy. They're just not healthy, right? I've seen a lot of people saying, at the trade deadline when the Pelicans didn't make a move to upgrade the center position, that spelled the doom. No, it didn't. They won a bunch of games after that. They've beaten some good teams without that too. You're losing to really elite teams and you don't have Brandon Ingram, your second best player, arguably your first best player. Let's not overthink this, right? This team, when healthy, can be really useful. Teams want to wall off Zion Williamson. That is going to leave the mid-range open for Brandon Ingram. Look, at least it's a credible threat, even if I don't love that shot and would rather have him take threes. But we've also seen this team not take threes. Well, Brandon Ingram can, and he makes them when he's kind of in the mood to do it, I guess. But that's still something that he probably would help the team with when it comes to this, right? If teams are going to leave him open for some of the mid-range shots this season on 10 to 16 feet, that kind of awful mid-range you don't want him taking, it's above 50%. 16 feet to the three-point range, you really don't want him taking those shots, but he's shooting 46%. That's not a bad number to have here. at least. It's a bit of a safety valve. He has games where he misses those and it hurts New Orleans, but sometimes those are just kind of like body blows a little bit in a heavyweight fight. That's what they're going to give you, and you make a couple of those. Teams will step out at least a little bit to try and contest it, and that's going to open things up for Zion Williamson. That allows guys to cut baseline. Doesn't help you with cuts down the middle or anything like that, like LeBron James was talking about, but at least puts more pressure on the defense than really anyone else right now is capable of doing, because teams are just so focused on Zion Williamson. But Brandon Ingram's on the scouting report too. They could use that. Just keeping the ball moving, the playmaking too, right? He has some aggression. He's not scared to attack the basket and go and try and score. That's exactly what you want to see overall. And if he can do that when they get him back, then there's a chance that you can kind of turn this around. We'll get into the standings and kind of what the Pelicans need to do to try and lock up a spot not in the play-in tournament. Because I think, as I've long said, goals, expectations need to adjust depending on the circumstances here. Well, we need to adjust to maybe, again, we'll look at the standings in a minute here. But Brandon Ingram, they expect that maybe he can make a return, with 2 games remaining in the regular season to give him a little bit of a warm-up before you go into the postseason. That sounds great to me. That's kind of a perfect ideal situation for New Orleans. There's some winnable games coming up. They've proven they can win even without him. So try and, hold court until he gets back, try and win 2 of the games at the end of the regular season, and you should be okay. But defensively, he makes them better, which then makes them better offensively, which is truly where he helps them too. So all of those things is meaning New Orleans is missing a key player. So we can point to the center position. And look, center has been a problem for New Orleans. The bigger thing, y'all, is just missing Brandon Ingram and not having him out there on the court. But they're going to get him back soon, and I think that does fix a lot of what's hurting New Orleans right now and kind of stabilizes them and gets them back to being a team that, with the right matchup in the first round, can win and could advance to the second round. A matchup where the center position doesn't impact you as much. It's the Clippers. It's maybe the Timberwolves. So they're going to end up being okay. Just because they've lost 2 games at home to good teams in kind of rough fashion doesn't mean that the season's over by any stretch, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a play-in tournament team either. But even with Brandon Ingram, when he's there in the play-in tournament, you maybe feel a little bit better than without him. Though I would like to avoid the play-in tournament at all costs. So hopefully he comes back sooner rather than later. So how do they avoid the play-in tournament? What kind of needs to happen with all of that? Let's talk about the standings in the Western Conference, because those are tight. Those are tight and things are close. But New Orleans is maybe in a better position than you think. So we'll look at that strength, the schedule of them, the opponent, all of those things coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can just plug into your existing TV, and it's going to give you access to millions of movies, TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. So whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes all of us at Locked On. And most of the big pro leagues, college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date, whether it's March Madness, the NBA, MLB, and a whole lot more. They also have great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on the Fire TV and Alexa devices. And if you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. I just started using it. It's great. You can get everything you need all in one spot. Trust me on all of this. To learn more, visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, whether it's the playoffs, whether it's what they need to do in the offseason, the X's and O's, the coaching. We'll look at all of that. We cover it all here. So subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join almost 10,000 other Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Tomorrow, we will break down what we see from the Pelicans in tonight's game against the Orlando Magic as well. So be sure to come back for that. 2 more home games on this before just one left at the end of the regular season against the Los Angeles Lakers. These 2 games really, really matter. So let's talk about the standings and where the Pelicans are right now, because things in the Western Conference in the kind of middle of all of this is really tough right now. When I'm recording this, the Dallas Mavericks are now, so the Los Angeles Clippers are in the 4th seed, and it seems certain that they are going to kind of lock that up. Their schedule is not as easy as Dallas, but I trust the Clippers a slight bit more than I trust the Dallas Mavericks. They've been up and down, Dallas has been, all season long. All season long, they've done this, where they string together. They have the longest winning streak in the NBA currently. They've done this before, then they lose a bunch of games, and they peak again, then they hit a valley, and back and forth and back and forth. It's not a great situation to be in. They're peaking at the right time, and they're doing it defensively, which is not what they normally do. It's just still Dallas, and until they don't do stuff like this and maybe get out of the first round, I'm not truly going to trust them. So they're 2 games behind the Clippers. I think that one really might come down to it at the end of the regular season. Per Tankathon, Dallas has the 23rd easiest strength of schedule remaining. They have 8 games remaining, including like 3 guaranteed wins against maybe the Pistons, the Charlotte Hornets, and the Atlanta Hawks. But they also have tough games against the Rockets, the Golden State Warriors, the Miami Heat, and the Oklahoma City Thunder. All those teams are playing for something, and that's 5 games right there. So I don't necessarily know if how they're going to handle some of those tough ones. And if they don't, they're going to end up finishing 5th, and it's going to leave the Clippers, who do have a tough strength of schedule because they have the Nuggets on there in 2 games against the Suns. That's going to leave them in the 4th spot. I think that's probably how that's going to go. I think New Orleans can hold on to the 6th seed. They're a half game behind Dallas now. They're a full game up on the Phoenix Suns, who sit in 7th. And then they're a game and a half up on the Sacramento Kings in 9th. There's really no danger, I think, at this point of the Pelicans falling to 9th. That's the Los Angeles Lakers, 3 games behind them. If New Orleans, and the way I kind of view it, if New Orleans goes about 500 the rest of the way, I think they're going to be okay and be able to hold on to the 6th seed. So that means about 4-3 or so. If you count, say, the Spurs and the Trailblazers as a guaranteed win, you can maybe get a win against the Orlando Magic, the Sacramento Kings. That's 4 right there. I think the Lakers are beatable at home at the end of the regular season. You know, the toughest game is probably going to be on the road at Phoenix, and then on the road first night of a back-to-back against the Golden State Warriors. But Golden State might also be eliminated at that time. You know, you have the Houston Rockets kind of nipping at their heels, but they're only 2 games back. There's a chance, depending on what happens with the Golden State Warriors. They have tough games coming up twice against the Dallas Mavericks. They're playing on Tuesday night. I'm recording this before that game happens. So that could really bury them a little bit. You then look at a team like Phoenix, who has the toughest strength of schedule remaining. None of the wins on their schedule are gimmies. 2 games against the Timberwolves, 2 games against the Clippers, game against the Cavs, the Pelicans, and the Sacramento Kings. Sacramento also has a tough schedule coming up. They have games against the Celtics, the Thunder, the Clippers, the Pelicans, the Knicks, the Suns. They have maybe 2 gimmies in Portland and Brooklyn, but that's a pretty rough stretch. And they could easily go something like 2-6, 3-5 during that stretch. I think when you look at a lot of these teams beating each other up, and that's the ideal situation here, the Pelicans could find themselves basically just kind of staying in 6 if they go 500 the rest of the way. Ideally, if you go 4-3, that gets you to 49 wins. That should be enough for the 6th seed here, because that would mean Phoenix then needs to win 5 games. And when you look at their schedule remaining, where are the 5 wins, right? They have 7 games left. They would need to go 5-2 against kind of the toughest schedule in the league. I'm not sure that that's going to be the case for them. If they split some of those, they go 3-3. Like, that's not a good situation. 3-4, 4-3, right? That still puts them behind New Orleans, as long as New Orleans doesn't lose significant ground. So taking care of home court these next 2 games against the Orlando Magic, who kind of punked them last game. So hopefully they come out with the right kind of attitude with that. And I expect a lot of small ball Zion at the 5 in this one to try and create some space and scoring. You know, shooting threes would be good too. While you play the games, we'll see. I think New Orleans is going to be in an okay spot. It might be a little closer than we'd like. It might come down to the final games of the regular season, but they can definitely do this. And I think that's one of the most important things. Just get in as the 6th seed. If that's it, that's it. You would play the Timberwolves here. That's not a bad position to be in. If you get to the 5 seed, you play the Clippers. I like either of those two matchups. The ideal scenario is to be on the opposite side of the bracket from the Denver Nuggets. If New Orleans is in 6th and then the Denver Nuggets go to 1, I think it puts them on the opposite side where you then don't need to worry about them in the next round of the playoffs. So that could be an ideal situation here. We'll see how it all plays out though, but it's fun having meaningful games here in April, which is not something that we always get. So hopefully the Pelicans can take care of the Orlando Magic at home and then the Spurs on Friday. And I think that's going to put them in a real good position to avoid the play-in tournament. What do you think? What do you think the record they need to finish with to avoid the play-in tournament? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. And I'll be back with y'all tomorrow to recap the game.